I am Victoria, 19 years old, and I thought I had done everything right. For years, I saved $32,000 for college through endless babysitting gigs and summer jobs. Then came the shock of discovering my account emptied by my own mother just before freshman year. Now, 2 years later, she demands I contribute to my stepsister's dorm expenses. The betrayal cuts twice as deep. What she never expected was how I found a solution that forever changed our family dynamics. Let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you want to hear how I finally stood up for myself. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston with my mother Janet was mostly stable until I turned 3. That was when my father walked out of our lives, leaving behind sporadic birthday cards and occasional phone calls that grew less frequent as years passed. Mom and I developed a close bond through those early years. I was her little shadow, following her around our modest two-bedroom house that she worked so hard to maintain. Mom worked as a real estate agent for a local firm. She was good at her job too, bringing in enough money for us to live comfortably. Not wealthy by any means, but we never went hungry and always had what we needed. I remember being proud when clients would call our home phone in the evenings, asking specifically for her because they heard she was the best in town. I learned the value of hard work from watching her. By the time I turned 12, I was determined to start earning my own money. I put up homemade flyers around the neighborhood offering babysitting services. My first client was the Andersons down the street with their twin 4-year-olds. $8 an hour felt like a fortune. I still remember the weight of those first earned bills in my palm. At 14, I expanded to summer jobs working at the local ice cream shop, then a grocery store, saving nearly every penny. When I turned 15, Mom took me to open my first bank account. The bank manager explained how interest worked, and I became obsessed with watching my balance grow month after month. College was always the goal. Mom had never gone herself, but talked about it like a promised land of opportunity. Dating was never easy for Mom after Dad left. There was a string of men who came and went through our lives. Some lasted a few months, others barely made it to a second date. Mom kept these relationships mostly separate from me, introducing me only to the ones who stuck around longer than 6 weeks. Then came Stephen when I was 16. He was different from the start. Mom brought him home after only their third date. He owned a construction company, drove an expensive car, and had the kind of charm that filled a room. He laughed too loud at his own jokes and had a habit of touching Mom possessively on the small of her back. Something about him made me uneasy from the beginning, but Mom was smitten in a way I had never seen before. 2 months into their relationship, Mom introduced me to Stephen's daughter Amanda. At 14, she was 2 years younger than me, with an enviable collection of designer clothes and the latest iPhone. Our first meeting was at an awkward dinner, where the adults drank too much wine and talked about how we were going to be sisters. Amanda and I tried making conversation about school and music, finding little common ground, but making an effort for our parents' sake. In public, Stephen was the epitome of charm. He picked up dinner checks with Flourish brought Mom flowers for no reason, and always complimented her cooking even when she burned the pasta. But at home, a different side emerged. He had opinions about everything from how the dishwasher should be loaded to what time Mom should be home from work. Small criticisms peppered their conversations, usually followed by him saying "just kidding" with a smile that never reached his eyes. 6 months after they started dating, Stephen sold his house and moved in with us. Our small home suddenly felt cramped with his oversized leather recliner taking up space in the living room and his toiletries crowding our single bathroom. Amanda stayed with us every other weekend, taking over our guest room that had previously been my study space. The household dynamic shifted dramatically. Stephen spoke often about family values and expectations, emphasizing loyalty above all else. Mom began consulting him on decisions she used to make independently. I noticed her checking her phone constantly when we were out together, texting him updates about where we were and when we'd be home. The tension between Mom and me grew as I entered my senior year of high school. Our once close relationship became strained with arguments about curfews, chores, and my increasing desire for independence. Stephen often inserted himself into these disagreements as the voice of reason, though his solutions typically favored additional restrictions on my activities. Despite the changing atmosphere at home, I remained focused on my future. The University of Massachusetts had been my dream school since freshman year. Their business program was well respected, and the campus was far enough from home to provide independence, but close enough that I could visit if needed. When my acceptance letter arrived in April of my senior year, I screamed so loud that our neighbor called to check if everything was okay. We celebrated that night with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant. For a few hours, it felt like old times with Mom. Even Steven seemed genuinely happy for me raising his glass in a toast to my future. Amanda rolled her eyes throughout dinner, but I was too excited to care. As the conversation turned to finances, Stephen casually mentioned how expensive college had become these days. He talked about family responsibilities and shared burdens. I assured them that I had been saving for years and had nearly enough for my first year's tuition and housing. Mom smiled proudly, but I caught a strange look that passed between her and Stephen, a silent communication I couldn't decipher. Looking back now, that moment should have been my first warning. The summer before college was a blur of activity. I worked double shifts at the grocery store and picked up extra babysitting gigs whenever possible. Every payday, I deposited my earnings and watched with pride as my savings account grew. By August, I had reached my goal of $32,000, the result of nearly 7 years of disciplined saving. It wasn't enough for all 4 years of college, but it would cover my freshman year completely and part of sophomore year. I had already completed scholarship applications and planned to work part-time while studying. Financial independence was within my grasp, something I had worked towards since I was barely a teenager. 2 weeks before move-in day, Mom and I went shopping for dorm essentials. For a few hours wandering through Target with our overflowing cart, I felt that familiar mother-daughter connection that had become increasingly rare. We debated the merits of different comforter sets, laughed at some of the more outlandish dorm gadgets, and splurged on a mini fridge that was on sale. Mom seemed genuinely excited for me, suggesting items I might need, and even offering to pay for some of the basics. 1 week before I was scheduled to move into my dorm, I logged into my bank account to order textbooks online. I had calculated exactly how much I could spend on books, while still having enough for tuition and housing. But instead of seeing my carefully accumulated $32,000, my account showed a balance of $42.16. My first thought was that there had been some kind of technical error. I refreshed the page several times, logged out and back in again, even restarted my computer. But the number didn't change. With shaking hands, I called the bank, certain there had been a mistake. The representative pulled up my account information and informed me that a withdrawal for $31,957.84 had been made 3 days earlier in person at a branch across town. When I asked who had made the withdrawal, she confirmed it was done with proper identification and my account information. Only one other person had access to my account as a joint owner, added when I was a minor, my mother. I confronted Mom the moment she got home from work. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of surprise or concern, she remained calm, setting down her purse and kicking off her shoes, as if I had asked about the weather. "The money is gone, Victoria," she said, her voice eerily steady. "We needed it for family expenses. Stephen has been having some issues with his business, and we had to take out a second mortgage. Your college fund had to be redirected to more pressing family needs." I couldn't process what I was hearing. The money I'd saved since I was 12 years old, money I had earned hour by hour, dollar by dollar, was just gone, used for Stephen's business problems. I felt physically ill, like someone had punched me in the stomach. "But what about college?" I managed to ask through tears. "I move in next week. My tuition payment is due." "What am I supposed to do?" Mom crossed her arms, a gesture that created an invisible barrier between us. "The community college has late registration still open. You can live at home and help with expenses while you take classes. Maybe in a year or two, when things stabilize financially, you can transfer to UMass." That was when Stephen emerged from their bedroom, as if he'd been listening to the entire conversation. He placed his hand on Mom's shoulder possessively. "Your mother and I have been carrying the financial burden of this family for too long," he said. "It's time you understand that family needs come first. Individual wants, like expensive universities, are secondary. We're all making sacrifices." I looked at them both, these strangers who had replaced my mother and her loyalty to me. Individual wants. This wasn't a shopping spree or a luxury vacation. This was my education, my future, the very thing Mom had encouraged me to work toward since childhood. The argument that followed was the worst we ever had. I screamed until my voice gave out, crying so hard I could barely breathe. I brought up years of promises, reminded her of how hard I'd worked, begged her to reconsider. Mom remained unmoved, repeating phrases that sounded rehearsed about family unity and priorities. When I finally gathered enough composure to ask exactly why Stephen's business troubles were suddenly my responsibility, Mom delivered the ultimatum that would change our relationship forever. "Victoria," she said coldly, "this is how it is now. Either accept that we're a family with shared responsibilities, or you can leave. Those are your choices." The realization that my mother had chosen Stephen over me, that she had stolen from her own daughter to bail out a man she'd known for barely a year, was too painful to process. I retreated to my room, locking the door and sliding down to the floor, my back against the wall as sobs racked my body. The next morning, I called the university financial aid office in a panic. The woman who answered, hearing the desperation in my voice, connected me with a counselor named Jordan, who talked me through emergency options: late application for federal loans, emergency grants for students in crisis work study positions that started immediately. These became my lifeline. I moved into my dorm the following week with only the essentials we'd purchased at Target. While other students arrived with parents helping carry new laptops and televisions, I came alone with 2 suitcases of clothes and a backpack. Mom had texted offering to drive me, but I couldn't bear to see her. The betrayal was too fresh, too deep. My first semester was a blur of work and study. I took on a job at the dining hall that started at 5:30 in the morning, then attended classes followed by evening shifts at the library until closing. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. Somehow I maintained decent grades driven by a determination that was equal parts ambition and spite. I called Mom a few times during those first months away. Each conversation was strained, filled with awkward pauses and superficial questions about classes and weather. I never asked about Stephen or the money. She never offered information about either. When Thanksgiving break arrived, I stayed on campus. The idea of returning to a home where I was now considered a financial burden rather than a daughter was unbearable. I told Mom I had too much coursework to come home, which wasn't entirely untrue. She didn't push the issue. I spent that Thanksgiving in a nearly empty dormitory, eating a sad turkey sandwich from the only campus cafe that remained open during the break. But even in that lonely moment, I felt a strange sense of pride in my independence. I was surviving against the odds, and without the support system I had counted on my entire life. Christmas might have been equally solitary if not for my roommate Jazz, who refused to leave me alone for another holiday. She practically dragged me home to her family in Worcester, insisting it wasn't charity, but simply what friends did for each other. Her parents welcomed me warmly, never asking uncomfortable questions about my own family situation. Slowly, I began rebuilding my life. Jordan from financial aid became a regular point of contact, helping me navigate scholarship applications and connecting me with resources for financially independent students. New friendships formed with classmates who knew nothing of my family drama, but offered support simply because they enjoyed my company. By the end of that first year, I had established a routine that, while exhausting, was sustainable. And more importantly, I had proven to myself that I could survive without the safety net that had been violently ripped away from me. What I didn't know then was that my mother's betrayal wasn't finished yet. As sophomore year began, I had settled into a rhythm at college that felt almost normal. I worked 25 hours weekly at the campus coffee shop, where the manager appreciated my reliability enough to schedule me around my classes. I also picked up tutoring jobs through the business department, helping freshmen with accounting principles, which I had aced the previous year. Despite my heavy work schedule, I was thriving academically. My GPA had landed me on the dean's list, and professors knew me by name, often using my assignments as examples in class. There was a certain satisfaction in this success, knowing I had achieved it entirely on my own terms and through my own efforts. My social life had expanded too. What began as study groups evolved into genuine friendships with a diverse circle of students who became my chosen family. There was Jazz, my roommate from freshman year, who was studying education with plans to teach elementary school. Marcus was a computer science major, with a talent for finding free food events on campus. Aisha, an international student from Nigeria, was pursuing political science and taught me how to cook meals that reminded her of home. We supported each other through exams, breakups, and family drama. None of them knew the full story about my mother and the stolen money at first. I had compartmentalized that pain, tucking it away, where it couldn't affect my new life. But they sensed something wasn't right when I never talked about going home for breaks or receiving care packages like many other students. The summer after freshman year brought another opportunity for growth. I secured an internship at a local accounting firm working under a senior accountant who was impressed by my work ethic. The position paid better than campus jobs, allowing me to start rebuilding my savings, albeit at a much slower pace than before. It was during this internship that I met Sophia, a partner at the firm who took an interest in my situation. After overhearing me decline an invitation to a staff lunch because I was watching my budget, she invited me to her office for coffee. Something about her directness and genuine concern broke through my carefully constructed walls. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything about the money my mother and Stephen. Instead of pity, Sophia offered practical guidance. She helped me open a new bank account at a different institution, one where my mother had no connection. She taught me about building credit responsibly and creating an emergency fund. Most importantly, she showed me that my experience, while painful, had given me financial wisdom beyond my years. Back on campus for sophomore year, text messages from Mom became increasingly sporadic. Our communication had devolved into holiday greetings and occasional updates about weather or local news. She never mentioned Stephen directly, though his presence lurked in the background of our conversations. An unspoken tension neither of us acknowledged. When Christmas approached, I reluctantly agreed to a brief visit home. The house felt foreign, redecorated with Stephen's taste evident in the new leather furniture and large television dominating the living room. Amanda, now 16, had adopted her father's dismissive attitude toward me, barely looking up from her phone when I entered a room. Stephen made little effort to hide his dislike, making passive-aggressive comments about students who think they're too good to help their families, or asking pointed questions about how I could afford to buy new clothes on a part-time salary. Mom intervened occasionally, but mostly seemed determined to maintain surface-level peace at any cost. I noticed changes in my mother, too. The confident woman who had once managed our household single-handedly now deferred to Stephen on most decisions. She checked with him before making plans, laughed nervously when he interrupted her, and seemed constantly vigilant about his moods. I recognized the signs of someone walking on eggshells, having done so myself during the months before I left for college. The most revealing moment came when I helped Mom with dishes after dinner. Amanda had been talking nonstop about colleges she was considering, all expensive private universities far beyond what my mother and Stephen could comfortably afford. Yet neither adult had suggested community college or state schools as they had so forcefully recommended to me. In fact, I noticed shopping bags in Amanda's room from high-end stores filled with dorm items like designer bedding and decorative pillows, though she wouldn't be starting college for over a year and a half. When I mentioned this to Mom, she quickly changed the subject, her eyes darting toward the living room where Stephen was watching television. Later that evening, scrolling through Mom's social media, I discovered dozens of posts celebrating Amanda's academic achievements and college visits. Photos of them touring private university campuses, captions about my little girl's bright future, and excited updates about application submissions. The contrast to my own experience was stark and painful. I left the next morning earlier than planned with the excuse of picking up an extra work shift. Mom hugged me goodbye with tears in her eyes, whispering that she missed me. I couldn't bring myself to say the same, though part of me did miss the mother she used to be before Stephen. The drive back to campus was filled with silent tears. By the time I arrived at my apartment, I had made a decision to protect my emotional health by limiting my expectations of my mother. I would no longer hope for the support and love I once took for granted. Instead, I would continue building my independent life with the people who had proven themselves worthy of my trust. Junior year preparations were underway with my friend group securing an affordable off-campus apartment. The pride I felt in managing my finances without family assistance was significant. While my savings account was nowhere near what it had been before I had managed to set aside $2,000 through careful budgeting and summer work, I had no idea that this hard-earned stability was about to be threatened once again by the people who should have been most invested in my success. It was a random Tuesday afternoon in October of my junior year. I had just finished a 3-hour marketing class and was grabbing coffee before my evening shift at the campus bookstore. My phone chimed with an email notification from an address I recognized immediately, my mother's. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was an olive branch, an acknowledgement of past wrongs, or even just a genuine check-in. I opened the email as I waited for my latte, unprepared for what I found. The subject line read, "Family Financial Responsibility." There was a brief message, "Victoria, your share of family responsibilities." Mom. Attached was a PDF document labeled Amanda's Dorm Expenses. With shaking hands, I downloaded the attachment. It was an invoice for $2,400 itemized for dorm housing fees, meal plan upgrades, and various campus services. The invoice was from Westfield Academy, an expensive private university known more for its country club atmosphere than academic rigor, and it was addressed to me. My initial shock quickly turned to anger so intense, I had to sit down at a corner table, coffee forgotten. After everything that had happened, after stealing my college fund and forcing me to work multiple jobs while taking full course loads, my mother had the audacity to send me a bill for my stepsister. I called her immediately, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building inside me. She answered on the third ring, her tone casual, as if she hadn't just dropped a financial bomb on me. "Did you get my email?" she asked, bypassing any greeting. "Yes," I replied. "What exactly am I looking at?" "Amanda started at Westfield last month. The expenses are more than we anticipated." She repeated the phrase she'd written in the email, her voice taking on that rehearsed quality I had come to associate with Stephen's influence. "This is your share of the family responsibilities." "My share?" I repeated, disbelief evident in every syllable. "Mom, you took $32,000 from me 2 years ago. Money that I saved for my own education. Money that I earned." "That's in the past." "Victoria," she interrupted, sounding irritated. "This is about now. Amanda needs support for her education, and as her sister, you should contribute." "Stepsister?" I corrected automatically. "A stepsister I barely know whose father stole my college fund." I heard a shuffle on the other end, and then Stephen's voice came through the speaker. He'd clearly been listening to our conversation. "Now listen here, young lady." He began using the condescending tone that had always made my skin crawl. "Your mother and I have been supporting this family for years. Amanda deserves the best education possible, and it's time you finally contribute to the family instead of just taking." His hypocrisy left me momentarily speechless. Had he forgotten that he was the reason my own college fund had disappeared, that I had been working since I was 12 to support myself while he lived in my mother's house? Taking, I finally managed to say, "What exactly have I taken from you, Stephen?" "The $32,000 you stole from me, the relationship I had with my mother before you came along." There was another shuffling sound, and then Amanda was on the phone, her voice carrying that entitled tone that reminded me so much of her father. "Victoria," she said, pronouncing my name with exaggerated patience as if speaking to a child. "Daddy and Janet said you would help with my dorm. It's so expensive, and the meal plan barely covers anything good. I had to upgrade it just to get sushi on Thursdays." That was the breaking point. I ended the call without another word, sitting alone in the busy coffee shop, as tears of frustration burned behind my eyes. I made it back to my apartment before completely breaking down, sinking to the floor of my bedroom as sobs racked my body. My roommates found me there an hour later. Jazz sat beside me on the floor, while Aisha brought me water, and Marcus stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly unsure how to handle a crying woman, but wanting to help nonetheless. For the first time, I told them everything. The full story of my mother, Stephen, the stolen money, and now this latest betrayal. I showed them the email and invoice, watching their expressions shift from concern to outrage on my behalf. "That's literally criminal," Marcus said, examining the invoice on my laptop. "They can't just take your money and then demand more." Aisha, whose father was an attorney back in Nigeria, was even more direct. This is theft, Victoria. In my country, your mother would be facing her family in a formal proceeding to explain such disrespect to her own child. Their validation of my feelings was like a lifeline. For so long, I had questioned whether I was overreacting, whether family obligations really did mean I should have accepted the loss of my savings without complaint. Hearing my friend's unequivocal support helped solidify my resolve. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept reviewing the invoice, and mentally calculating how much interest my stolen $32,000 would have earned in the 2 years since it was taken. I pulled up my old bank statements, scanning through years of deposits from babysitting jobs and summer work. As I dug through old financial records, I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. In the months leading up to the big withdrawal, there had been several smaller transfers from my account, ranging from $200 to $500 each. At the time, I had assumed they were my own withdrawals for school expenses or forgotten purchases. Now, with fresh suspicion, I wondered if my mother had been siphoning money for Amanda even before the big theft. The next morning, exhausted but determined, I called Sophia, my mentor from the accounting firm. Her advice was clear and compassionate. "Victoria," she said firmly, "this is not what family does to each other. Taking your money was wrong the first time. Asking for more now is simply unacceptable. You need to decide whether this is a battle worth fighting, but know that you would be completely justified in standing your ground." Her words crystallized something in me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about recognizing that the treatment I had received was genuinely unfair, and that I deserved better. For 2 years, I had been trying to accept what happened and move forward. But now I understood that moving forward didn't mean allowing the same patterns of exploitation to continue. This latest demand wasn't just a request for financial help. It was a test to see if I would continue to be the family doormat, accepting whatever scraps of affection were offered, while being expected to give everything in return. And I was done being tested. The University Legal Aid Center was located in a small office on the edge of campus, staffed by law students, supervised by practicing attorneys. I had walked past it countless times without ever imagining I would need their services, especially not for a case against my own mother. The student attorney who took my case, Darius, was a third-year law student with a kind face and meticulous note-taking habits. He listened without interruption as I explained the entire situation, starting with the joint bank account established when I was a minor, and ending with the invoice for Amanda's dorm expenses. When I finished speaking, Darius looked up from his notepad, with an expression that mixed professional interest with personal concern. "First, I want to be clear about something, Victoria," he said. "What happened to you isn't just morally wrong. In most states, including Massachusetts, what your mother did could potentially be considered financial exploitation of a family member. The fact that your name was on the account complicates things legally but doesn't make her actions right." He explained that the statute of limitations for such cases typically ranged from 3 to 6 years, meaning I was still within the window to pursue legal action if I chose that route. The thought of taking my mother to court sent a wave of nausea through me, but I forced myself to listen as Darius outlined my options. We could send a formal demand letter for repayment of the original amount, plus reasonable interest, he suggested. Sometimes that alone is enough to resolve the situation. If they refuse, we can file a civil complaint. But I want you to understand that legal action against family members can have long-lasting personal consequences regardless of the outcome. The weight of this decision felt overwhelming. Was I prepared to permanently damage my relationship with my mother in pursuit of justice? Then again, hadn't she already damaged our relationship by choosing Stephen and his daughter over me? I left the legal aid office with pamphlets on financial exploitation and a promise from Darius to draft a demand letter that I could review before deciding whether to send it. The walk back to my apartment was filled with conflicting emotions, a turbulent mixture of determination and doubt. Later that week, I met again with Jordan, the financial aid counselor, who had helped me during my first-year crisis. Her perspective was invaluable, having seen similar situations with other students. "You wouldn't believe how common family financial exploitation is," she told me, shaking her head sadly. "Last year, I worked with a student whose grandparents emptied a college fund that had been set up since his birth. Another had parents who took out credit cards in her name and maxed them out. Jordan connected me with a student support group specifically for those who'd experienced financial hardship due to family actions. Hearing other stories helped me understand that I wasn't alone in this difficult situation. It also reinforced my growing conviction that boundaries were necessary even with family. As I researched my options, I made a disturbing discovery. While scrolling through my mother's social media accounts, I found dozens of posts contradicting the narrative of financial hardship she had presented to me. There were photos of a new SUV with a caption about Stephen's growing business, pictures of my mother showing off diamond earrings that Stephen had given her for their anniversary. Most damning were the posts about Amanda's dorm setup featuring a plush comforter set I recognized from a high-end department store, decorative pillows that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and an expensive mini refrigerator, far nicer than the clearance model Mom had bought for me. One post particularly caught my attention. So proud of our Amanda starting at Westfield Academy. We spared no expense to make sure her college experience is perfect. Proud parents had college life, no expense spared. The phrase burned in my mind as I thought about the meals I had skipped to save money, the textbooks I couldn't afford to buy, the nights I stayed up working instead of studying. With renewed determination, I began crafting a response to my mother's email. I created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every dollar I had deposited into my account over the years with dates, sources, and running totals. I calculated the interest that would have accrued had the money remained in my account. The final figure came to $34,722.13. I composed a clear, unemotional message stating that not only would I not be contributing to Amanda's college expenses, but I expected repayment of my stolen funds with interest. I outlined the evidence I had gathered, including bank records and social media posts contradicting claims of financial hardship. I established clear boundaries regarding future financial requests and stated the consequences if these boundaries were violated: formal legal action. Before sending it, I sought guidance from the campus counseling center about managing the emotional fallout that would likely follow. The counselor taught me techniques for handling anxiety related to family conflict and helped me prepare for various potential reactions from my mother and Stephen. The support group for financially independent students became another valuable resource. Many members had already navigated similar confrontations with family and offered practical advice based on their experiences. They also helped me set up additional security measures for my bank accounts and credit report, protecting against any potential retaliation. After weeks of preparation, consultation, and careful consideration, I made my decision. I would formally demand repayment through legal channels. The Student Legal Aid Office sent a notarized letter to my mother's address outlining the claim and requesting response within 30 days. As I watched Darius place the sealed envelope in the outgoing mail bin, I felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, taking a stand that would permanently alter my family relationships. Yet beneath the anxiety was a quiet sense of pride, for perhaps the first time I was truly advocating for myself, rather than accepting injustice to keep the peace. I had no idea how complex and revealing the coming confrontation would be, nor how it would ultimately reshape my understanding of family loyalty and self-worth. My mother's response to the legal notice came faster than expected. Less than 48 hours after the letter was delivered, my phone exploded with notifications. 6 missed calls, 11 text messages, and 3 voicemails, all from her number. I was in class when the barrage began, my phone vibrating repeatedly in my backpack, until I had to step outside to silence it. The voicemails escalated in intensity. The first was tearful, with Mom asking how I could do this to her after everything she had done for me. The second was angry, accusing me of being ungrateful and selfish. By the third, Stephen had clearly gotten involved, his voice audible in the background as Mom demanded I call back immediately before things got worse. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I forwarded the voicemails to Darius at Legal Aid, who advised me to maintain communication only in writing to create a clear record of all interactions. He helped me draft a brief email stating that all further communication should go through the Legal Aid Office. This approach didn't deter Stephen. That evening, my phone began receiving messages from unknown numbers. Messages that were clearly from him based on content and tone. Some were threatening, suggesting he would make sure I never worked in any reputable business after graduation. Others attempted to manipulate my emotions, claiming that my mother was distraught and might need medical attention because of my actions. I blocked each new number as messages arrived documenting everything for the legal record. Campus security was notified about possible harassment, with officers adding extra patrols near my apartment building as a precaution. 3 days after the initial notice, my Friday afternoon class was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. I recognized my mother's voice, immediately demanding to know which classroom I was in. My professor paused mid-lecture, looking confused, as a security officer attempted to explain university policies about campus visitors. Heart pounding, I gathered my belongings and slipped out the side door, texting campus security that I was safely away from the situation. From a distance, I watched as my mother created a scene in the academic building, alternating between tears and angry demands to see her daughter. The public spectacle was humiliating, but I maintained my composure, retreating to the library where security assured me they would handle the situation. Later, I learned that my mother had been escorted from campus with a warning about trespassing on university property. That evening, I received a surprising call from a number I barely recognized. It was my father, who had maintained only minimal contact through occasional birthday cards over the years. "Victoria, is this a good time to talk?" His voice sounded hesitant, almost nervous. "Dad," I replied, the word feeling strange in my mouth after so long. "How did you get my number?" "Your mother called me, actually. She was quite upset." He paused. "I'm not taking sides here, but I thought you might want someone to talk to who's not directly involved." Despite my initial skepticism, I found myself opening up to him. There was something liberating about explaining the situation to someone who knew my mother, but wasn't entangled in the current drama. As I spoke, he listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but offering no judgment. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "There are things you don't know about your mother, Victoria. Things that might help explain some of this behavior, though they don't excuse it." Over the next hour, my father revealed family secrets I'd never known. My mother had grown up in a household with extreme financial instability. Her own mother had struggled with gambling addiction, often leaving teenage Janet to figure out how to pay bills and keep food on the table. This explained her constant anxiety about money, even during periods when we were financially secure. More surprisingly, he shared that toward the end of their marriage, my mother had emptied their joint savings account to lend money to her brother for a business venture that quickly failed. The betrayal had been the final straw in their already troubled relationship. "I do have some documentation from that time," he said. "Bank records, emails about the money. If it would help your case, I can send them to you." His offer of support, however unexpected, gave me a strange sense of comfort. It also provided potentially valuable evidence of a pattern of behavior that extended beyond my own experience. The next day brought another unexpected communication. A text from Amanda, the first direct message she'd ever sent me without parental involvement. "Victoria, I don't know if you'll read this, but I'm sorry," her message began. "I didn't know they took your money for my college. Dad told me you just didn't save anything and were jealous of me. I just found out the truth, and it's messed up. We're moving my stuff out of the fancy dorm this weekend. I'm transferring to state next semester." Her message continued, revealing her own complicated relationship with her father and my mother. Apparently, the perfect family image they projected on social media masked significant tensions at home. Amanda described walking on eggshells around her father's mood swings and feeling pressured to attend an expensive university she hadn't even wanted, just to maintain appearances. As the court date approached, my anxiety increased, despite the growing evidence in my favor. Darius helped me prepare for various scenarios, including the possibility of facing my mother and Stephen in the courtroom. We practiced answers to likely questions, reviewed all documentation multiple times, and discussed potential settlement terms I would be willing to accept. The day before our scheduled court appearance, I received a call from Darius. "Victoria's mother's attorney has reached out with a settlement offer." He said, his voice carefully neutral. "They want to avoid court tomorrow and are proposing a payment plan to return the full amount plus interest." The offer included monthly installments over 2 years, a signed admission of wrongdoing, and a legally binding agreement to cease all contact unless explicitly initiated by me. The terms were reasonable, perhaps even generous given the circumstances. Still, I needed time to consider whether I wanted this resolution or the more public reckoning of a court hearing. After consulting with Sophia Jordan and my support group, I decided to accept the settlement with one additional condition: a formal mediation session where I could address my mother directly about the emotional impact of her actions, not just the financial consequences. 2 days later, I sat across from my mother in a sterile conference room at the University Legal Aid Center. Stephen was noticeably absent, a detail that immediately caught my attention. Mom looked smaller somehow, her confident posture replaced by a hunched vulnerability I'd never associated with her. The mediator established ground rules for our conversation before leaving us alone as requested. For several minutes, we sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between us. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought it would come to this. Legal notices and mediators. I just wanted you to help your sister." "Stepsister," I corrected gently, no longer feeling the anger that had previously accompanied this distinction. "And this isn't about Amanda. It's about trust and respect, Mom. It's about you choosing someone else's family over your own daughter." Tears filled her eyes. "Stephen said it was the only way to save our house to take your money. He said you'd understand because you're family." And then things kept getting worse financially. "But he wouldn't let me tell you the truth. He said you'd use it against us." As she spoke, a picture emerged of manipulation far more extensive than Iddy imagined. Stephen had systematically isolated my mother, controlling their finances, while creating the illusion of prosperity through leased vehicles and borrowed jewelry for social media posts. The second mortgage had been necessary not because of business troubles, but because of hidden gambling debts had accumulated over years. "I won't blame everything on him." Mom continued, showing a self-awareness that surprised me. "I made my choices. I betrayed your trust. I put a man ahead of my daughter, and I'll have to live with that shame for the rest of my life." Her tears flowed freely now, and I found my own eyes welling up in response. Despite everything, this was still the woman who had read me bedtime stories, who had cheered at every school event, who had taught me to be independent and strong, often by her own example. "What happens now?" she asked after we'd both regained composure. "You stick to the repayment plan," I said firmly, "and we both take some time to heal. I'm not ready to have you back in my life right now, Mom. The trust is broken, and it will take more than one conversation to rebuild it." She nodded acceptance, mixing with sorrow in her expression. "I understand. And Stephen? What about him?" She twisted the wedding ring on her finger. "He's moving out next week." After everything came to light about the gambling, the lies, I finally saw what you and others had been trying to tell me. I felt no satisfaction at this news, only a complicated mixture of relief for my mother and concern about her future. Whatever his faults, Stephen had been her partner for nearly 3 years. His absence would leave a void in her life. As our mediation session concluded, I made no promises about reconciliation. But I did accept the first installment check, which my mother handed over with shaking fingers. It represented more than money. It was a tangible acknowledgement of wrong and a first step toward possible redemption. Walking out of that conference room, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had set down a burden I'd been carrying for years. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time since discovering my empty bank account, I felt a glimmer of hope that healing might eventually be possible for all involved. 1 year later, I entered my senior year with a renewed sense of purpose and unexpected stability. The monthly payments from my mother had arrived consistently, each one accompanied by a brief note, sometimes just "thank you," other times longer reflections or updates on her life. I kept them all in a box under my bed, reading them occasionally, but rarely responding. My financial situation had improved dramatically. With the settlement payments, I had been able to reduce my work hours to a manageable 15 per week, allowing more time for studies and internship opportunities. My savings account, once decimated, now contained enough to cover emergencies and start planning for post-graduation life. The previous spring, I'd secured a prestigious internship with a national accounting firm working in their forensic accounting division. The irony wasn't lost on me that my personal experience with financial exploitation had led me toward a career helping others in similar situations. My supervisor had already hinted at a potential job offer upon graduation, impressed by my attention to detail and personal commitment to the work. My apartment that senior year was the first place that truly felt like mine. A small one-bedroom off campus that I could afford without roommates. It featured secondhand furniture carefully selected from thrift stores and decorated with plants and photographs of friends. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was creating a home that reflected my own tastes and priorities. The relationship with my mother had entered a new phase of tentative reconciliation. 3 months after our mediation session, I'd agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral location. That first meeting had been awkward, filled with careful small talk and conscious avoidance of difficult topics. But it had opened the door to occasional text exchanges and eventually monthly lunch meetings that grew increasingly comfortable. Stephen was completely out of the picture. My mother had filed for divorce shortly after our mediation session, when further investigation revealed gambling debts far beyond what she had initially discovered. She had moved to a small apartment, taken a second job to stabilize her finances, and started attending therapy sessions to understand the patterns that had led her to such a destructive relationship. Perhaps the most surprising development was my evolving relationship with Amanda. After transferring to State University, she had reached out periodically with questions about campus resources and study strategies. Our shared experience of Stephen's manipulation had created an unexpected bond. She wasn't quite a friend, but she was no longer the entitled stepsister I'd resented. Over coffee one rainy afternoon, Amanda confessed that she'd always been jealous of my relationship with my mother before Stephen entered the picture. "She looked at you like you were the most amazing thing in the world," Amanda said, stirring her latte absently. "My mom left when I was 4. All I had was Dad, and his approval always came with conditions. Your mom was the first adult who seemed to care about me without wanting something in return. Until Dad ruined that too. The admission helped me see our blended family experiment from a different perspective. Amanda had been seeking the maternal connection I had taken for granted, while I had been fighting to preserve it. We had been competitors rather than allies, both manipulated by Stephen's agenda. My father had become another unexpected source of support. After providing documents for my legal case, he'd suggested meeting for dinner when he was in town on business. That dinner led to regular phone calls and occasional visits, slowly rebuilding a relationship that had been neglected for most of my life. During one such visit, he shared his own regrets about our estrangement. "I convinced myself you were better off with just your mother," he admitted. "She was always the more nurturing parent, and I was working so much. But that was just an excuse. The truth is I was scared of screwing up, so I barely tried at all. That was worse than making mistakes would have been." His honesty opened space for mine. I told him about the anger he'd carried through childhood, the questions he'd had about why he left the birthdays, when he'd waited for calls that never came. We both cried during that conversation, mourning lost time, but grateful for the chance to create something new. The academic success I'd worked so hard for continued to flourish. I was named to the dean's list for the 6th consecutive semester, selected for a prestigious business school leadership program, and invited to present a research project at an undergraduate conference. Each achievement felt more meaningful knowing I'd earned it entirely through my own efforts. I'd also begun volunteering with a financial literacy program for teens, teaching weekly workshops at the local community center. Standing before groups of 16 and 17-year-olds explaining concepts like compound interest and predatory lending, I often thought about my younger self carefully depositing babysitting money and watching my account grow. For those students whose parents couldn't or wouldn't provide financial guidance, I became the mentor I had needed during my own financial crisis. I created resources specifically for young adults navigating independence, including a guide for students estranged from parents or facing family financial abuse. The program director, impressed by my curriculum, invited me to expand the workshops into a full semester course. With her sponsorship, I developed College Finances 101, a non-credit course offered to incoming freshmen at my university. The first session filled within hours of registration opening, revealing the widespread need for this practical education. My personal experience had transformed into professional purpose. The pain of betrayal, while still occasionally raw, had become fuel for creating positive change. Each student who learned to protect themselves financially represented a small victory, a ripple effect from my own hard-learned lessons. As graduation approached, I received an unexpected email from my mother requesting a special meeting. Despite our improved relationship, I felt a flicker of anxiety, wondering what new complication might be emerging. We met at our usual coffee shop where she arrived carrying a small gift bag. "This is for you," she said, sliding it across the table. "It's not much, but it's a start." Inside was a jewelry box containing my grandmother's pearl necklace, a family heirloom I had admired since childhood. Accompanying it was an envelope containing the final settlement payment delivered 2 months early. "I wanted you to have this for graduation," Mom explained, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Your grandmother always said it should go to the strongest woman in the family. That's you, Victoria. It always has been." The gesture touched me deeply. Not just the necklace itself, but the acknowledgement of my strength, the recognition of how much he'd overcome much of it without her support. "I graduate next month," I said, closing my fingers around the pearls. "Would you like to come?" The invitation hung between us, significant in its simplicity. She nodded, unable to speak through her emotion. It wasn't full forgiveness or complete restoration, but it was a meaningful step forward, a choice to include her in this milestone despite our complicated history. Looking back on the journey from that devastating discovery of my empty bank account to this moment of tentative healing, I could trace how each painful experience had shaped me. The betrayal had forced me to develop resilience I might never have discovered otherwise. The legal battle had taught me to advocate for myself without shame. The gradual reconciliation had shown me that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or excusing harm. Most importantly, I had learned that family extends beyond blood and legal ties. It includes the friends who offer their homes for holidays, the mentors who share their wisdom freely, the counselors who help navigate emotional minefields, and even the strangers who become allies in support groups. True family, I discovered, consists of those who respect your boundaries, celebrate your successes without jealousy, offer support without keeping score, and love you without using that love as a weapon of control. Sometimes those people share your DNA. Often they don't. As I prepared to walk across the graduation stage, I would be supported by this chosen family, alongside the biological one I was cautiously welcoming back into my life. Both were valuable. Both were real. And the family I had built for myself was perhaps the greatest achievement of all. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members over financial matters? I know this journey taught me that protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for healing and growth. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message about standing up for themselves, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and fairness, especially by those who claim to love you.